Thanks, Tom, and thanks for having
There we
Oh,
go.
there's the recording. Okay. Thanks so much for having me today. So my name is Lisa Nolan. I'm the Director of Education and Training here at Willow Domestic Violence Center. So today what we're going to do is we're going to do a very brief overview of Willow, some of our services. We're going to do a quick rundown of like what it is that we're talking about, domestic and dating violence, what it looks like sort of in the world in our community, what exactly we're talking about as far as like behaviors and things to look out for. And then I wanted to spend really quite a bit of time today on how to talk to your kids, how to talk to teens, and how to just talk to young people in general about things to look out for, and things that you can do to support kids as parents. So as Dr. Hall said, please feel free to ask questions anytime. I'm happy to receive questions anytime throughout the presentation, although I do know that sometimes in a presentation like this, there are some very specific questions. So if you do have a specific question that you'd like to ask, I would encourage you to use the chat. You can private chat me if you'd like, and then I can ask the question on your behalf without disclosing who you are. I would also encourage, if you feel safe and comfortable, to private message Tom. He can interrupt me and ask those questions as well on your behalf without disclosing who you are, if that feels comfortable for you as well. So don't wait to ask the questions. If you're thinking about it and it's relevant in your head, go ahead and do it. I also wanted to just give like a little bit of a caveat, is that we are talking about dating and domestic violence today. And this is hard stuff. This is hard stuff to talk about. For many people, it can be really triggering, or it can bring up some stuff that maybe you are expecting or weren't expecting. So I wanted to just take a moment to say, take care of yourself. You do not need to have your screen on today. If you were listening in, that's great. If you want your screen on, that's great. Just make sure you take care of yourself. If you need to walk away, please feel free to do that. If you need to just sign off, please feel free to do that. If you want to contact me afterwards, please feel free to do that. I put my information in the chat. I would just ask people to be really mindful of any disclosures that you're making about yourself, about your student, about any other students. If it's not about yourself personally, I would actually discourage you from doing that in this time, since we are recording. We don't want it to be out there. If you have something specific that you want to talk about, again, private chat me. The other caveat I will put out here is that I'm not a legal expert. So I have a lot of legal knowledge, and especially in this world, but I'm certainly not a legal expert. The other piece that I wanted to kind of set the context and the scene for this conversation is that I've been at Willow for about 2.5 years now. And prior to being at Willow, I actually spent most of my career in higher education. So for 14 years, I was working with college students. And specifically, I was working with college students in behavior stuff. So on college campus, when students do things that they are not supposed to do, they meet with somebody, they talk about their behavior, they talk about consequences and what those consequences are. For 14 years, I did that. And for 9 of those years, I was, for lack of a better comparison, the chief judge on a campus. So if you were in a lot of trouble and somebody was telling you to pack your bags, call your mom and go home, that was me making those decisions and having that conversation with students. And in probably the last 7 years that I did that job, a lot of what my role revolved around was Title IX. So sexual assault, dating violence, stalking, sexual harassment, all of that kind of stuff. So I have a particular knowledge of how this all works in a school environment, in a school setting, because Title IX, although we hear a lot about it on college campuses, is also specific to K-12 schools as well. So if you have questions surrounding that, I'm happy to do my best to answer some of those questions as well. All right, so let's jump in. I'm going to screen share in a minute, but I'm going to try not to do too much screen sharing right off the bat. So just a little bit about Willow. If you are familiar with us, normally people go, oh yeah, Willow, that's that women's shelter. I know you. And that's only about 40% true. We do have shelter services, but it's only one of the services that we offer. So for context, Willow's been here in Rochester and Monroe County for a long time. We've been here for over 40 years. Most of that time, our agency name though was Alternatives for Battered Women. So if you remember ABW, that's us. We rebranded in 2016, specifically because we serve more than women, and we don't use the word battered anymore. It's an old term that we don't use in the field. And also because we know that the spectrum of violence is much greater than physical abuse, so we needed to be more inclusive on that. We are safe zone trained, so all of our programs are welcoming and accepting of all genders, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation. We have 2 deaf staff members, so we have services that are available to the deaf, hard of hearing, deaf, blind, and CODA community. We have staff members who speak Spanish natively, so we're able to offer those services as well in a language that people can access. For any language that we don't speak or don't have access to, we regularly use language line, so that people don't have to have some of those barriers in place for language. So we're doing a lot of things at Willow. I'm actually gonna share this slide. I'm not gonna go through all of our programs today, but I will give you kind of a, there we go. All right, hang on, I gotta arrange all my windows here. The Zoom world, right? Go, present mode. There we go. Alrighty, so we're doing a lot of things at Willow. Yes, we have a shelter. It is open to all people. Again, women, children, men, however you identify, you're welcome in that service. We do have counseling that's available. Counseling is both individual and group-based. You do not have to be in shelter or wanting to access shelter to use our counseling services. That's important to understand. The majority of clients that we serve actually are not seeking shelter services. They're seeking other services, and counseling is one of our largest services. We do have court advocacy program. We're right downtown at the Hall of Justice. We help survivors walk through the order of protection process. Again, we're not attorneys, we're not giving legal advice, but we're supporting and advocating for survivors through that process and can walk with survivors through that process. We have mobile advocates who are out in the community. We recognize that people can't always get to us where we are. So we have advocates who are able to be out in the community where survivors are and where we can meet them and it's safe. We do education. This is a free service, so we do this all the time. We'll be with your students in Brighton High School in November doing some healthy relationship work. We're in schools all the time. We're on all the college campuses. We are in the healthcare setting. We're with law enforcement. We're with the legal justice community, attorneys all the time. We're doing this everywhere, and this is a free service. All of our services are free. Everything that we do at Willow is free. We don't do insurance. We don't bill insurance. We don't do any of that kind of stuff because it's simply barriers for survivors and it's not safe for survivors. Now, the one thing that I will highlight real quick is our hotline. Our hotline is the gateway to all of our services. So if you need a service, you have a question, you're looking for something, the hotline is a great first point of entry for you to any program at Willow. It is meant to be a crisis hotline for survivors. However, we receive calls from everybody on the hotline. We get calls from family and friends who are concerned. We get calls from service providers, from healthcare workers all the time that say, hey, we're working with a patient, we're not really sure what to do, we're looking for some resources and for some tips. We walk people through that all the time. We will just chat with people. We debrief with people. Hey, my family member is going through this. I just need somebody to talk about it with who gets it. Yep, we'll talk to you. It's a 24-hour hotline. It is always a human that answers that phone. It is not an answering service. It's not like, put the number in and then we'll call you back. That's not safe to do, so we don't do that. It is meant to be a crisis line though, so if we do have a lot of things happening, we may have to triage people and call them back if it is a non-emergent issue, but it is humans that answer that phone all the time. We also have a text line, again, same humans that answer the text messages, and we have real-time online chat on our website and through Facebook Messenger as well, so that if folks are feeling like they're being electronically monitored, they have another avenue for being able to contact us, not through Facebook Messenger, that's obviously traceable, but through our website, our real-time online chat, that's not traceable on a survivor's end. All right, so we're gonna jump into any thoughts or questions about, where my chat box go, about services. Okay, nope, all right, here we go. So just a couple real quick statistics just to kind of set the scene for us. This is a really common issue. A lot of people think about domestic violence as something that happens to other people or in, certain areas or whatever. But the truth is that this is something that happens all the time to anybody. This is the stat nationally in the United States: 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men, and 1 in 2 trans or non-binary people will experience some kind of domestic violence in their lifetime. That's a lot of people. This number is actually also from the CDC based on physical or sexual abuse. So this doesn't even count all the other junk that we're going to go over today either. So this means that we all know somebody, whether you know because they've told you, you've witnessed it, or we know them because they're out there. In New York State, the criteria for domestic violence and domestic partnership is what is below there, that it's intimate partners, people who are related through blood and related through marriage. So essentially, if somebody's looking for an order of protection or restraining order, and they're going to petition in family court, they have to meet some of the criteria on this list. This essentially excludes like friends, roommates, or just other people out there who are harassing them or stalking. There are other avenues for that, but this is what New York State considers as domestic. So again, this is an everybody issue. When we think about who is a survivor of domestic violence, we often really think about, we have a stereotype in our head, and for almost everybody, that's a woman. And for many people, it's a woman from some kind of place that feels just comfortable for them. There's some kind of stereotype there. What I will tell you is that through our services at Willow, I will tell you, we see everybody. There is not a single zip code in Monroe County that we don't see survivors from. There's not a single neighborhood. There is not a single socioeconomic status, education level, age, ability, religious background. Everybody walks through our services at Willow because this is something that can happen to anybody. Now, the flip side of that is that abusers can also be anybody, regardless of any of their isms. So here's your first really great red flag as a parent, is that abusers can be anybody. And that means that they are beautiful, gorgeous people that we all want to date. They're the captain of the team and the president of the club and the kid that everyone loves, right? It can be anybody. So when our young people are coming to us and they're saying, this person is harming me, or I've heard this rumor about this person, or something is happening and I saw it, and we're like, what? No, not that person. It couldn't be. They're so bright. They're the captain and the president and the thing and the thing. That's your first red flag. If that's your thought process, I need you to pause, rewind it back, and start thinking about a pattern. That's where we pause. Abusers can be anybody. We want to believe that they're yucky people that we'd be able to pick out of a lineup, or that we'd be able to tell just from looking at them or knowing, I'm going to say in quotes, where they're from, that would be it. But the truth is that it is absolutely not. Now, there's a big caveat to this anybody. We've thrown the net wide here because we know that this can be anybody, but the danger in saying that it can be anybody is that we don't include some of the risk factors. When we include some of the risk factors, though, is the dangers that we stereotype. So we're going to talk about that. But there are really big risk factors on who can be a survivor and who can be an abuser, truly. We know that people who are already from marginalized populations, who already have less access to supports in the community, those are folks who are at greater risk of experiencing this. Obviously, on the slide before this, we talked about the LGBTQ plus community. They are at risk for experiencing higher rates of domestic violence. Women of color are specifically at risk of experiencing higher rates of domestic and dating violence than their white counterparts. So again, we're not stereotyping to one specific group here, but we do have to understand that there are risk factors that make it more likely or more probable that somebody may experience this in their lifetime. And we can't ignore those factors when our red flags are popping up or when we're feeling like something's not right in a situation. Here's a risk factor: your kids. Kids, specifically teenagers aged about 16 to 24, are at a humongous risk factor for experiencing dating violence. This is the group that experiences dating violence at the highest rates of any other group age group in the United States, 16 to 24-year-olds, 4-year-olds, specifically females, but all teens this age. So this, the images that you see on the screen are captured from the CDC. This is their information, and their information is based on physical and sexual violence. But what we know is that about 1 in 3 teens will experience some form of dating abuse. So that's when we bust that out of that physical and sexual stuff and start talking about that verbal and emotional piece, which we'll talk about in a minute too. So that's a really large number of our young people who are experiencing some form of dating violence. The thing about this too is that we know that teens aren't telling us. We know that they are self-reporting, that they're trying to harm themselves, so they are attempting to harm themselves based on the violence that they're experiencing in their relationships too. So this is a big one. Now, here's the thing about teen dating relationships. As parents, I'm a parent, and as just adults looking in at teen relationships. When we see our teens dating, and you know, they're like 14, 15, 16, we look at their relationships and we all go, oh, that's so cute. You're gonna be broken up in 3 weeks. And when we do that, we don't pay attention to that relationship. And we say things to our teenagers like, oh, you don't even know what love is. You have no idea. Just wait until you grow up. Oh, you just have no idea. And we dismiss those relationships completely. Here's the thing about those relationships. As adults, we have the vision and the hindsight and the experience to know that maybe they will be broken up in 3 weeks. And maybe they will learn later in life a different way to love or a different form of love. And that's okay. But what those kids are experiencing in that moment is as real as it can possibly be. So when we say things like, you don't know what love is, or just wait, or like, whatever, we are disregarding the relationship. And when we disregard the relationship, we stop paying attention to it. And when we stop paying attention to it, we miss all the red flags that it's going to be bad. Not only that, when we disregard the relationship, our teens know that. Like, they can feel it, they can see in our attitudes, and they don't tell us things. How am I going to tell you about something bad that's happening to me when I already told you about good stuff and you dismissed me and you didn't believe it and you said, you don't even know what love is? We've already turned that light switch off to the relationship. So our teens are not coming to us. And I think that that's part of the reason why only 1/3 of teenagers tell us that bad things are happening, because they know that as adults, we will not believe them, that we don't take those relationships seriously. So I do need you to take those relationships seriously, because they are serious. And they can get bad, and they can get bad real fast. 3 weeks is fast enough for a relationship to get really bad and really violent. All right. So this work also is really important because the impact on kids, even young kids, is really big. So if you've never heard of adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, this is a wonderful rabbit hole to go down someday on your lunch break at work. This is something that is very common in young people around. So you can see what the ACEs chart is here from the CDC. So these are the things that are considered adverse childhood experiences. One of the most common ACEs in Monroe County is domestic violence. So knowing that these have huge impacts on kids, we see things like this, even from 0 to 17, have long lasting impacts on adults. So things like predisposed for things like depression, anxiety. We see long-term health issues directly correlated with ACEs. Things like heart disease, lung disease, diabetes are directly correlated with the trauma that people experience as children. Engaging in risky behavior as a young person, as an adult, more at risk to live in poverty, more at risk to lose out on educational opportunities. All of those things can literally be correlated back to some of the stuff that happen to kids in their early informative years. So again, it's really important to understand that this is long lasting. It's not just like, oh, these teenage years and you'll just get through it. Nope, this keeps on going. It carries on through adulthood. And that's why sometimes as adults, we look at our friends and go, what in the world is going on with you? Well, what in the world is going on with them might be what happened to them in childhood. And it's just this trauma is still just cycling through their life. Okay, so real quick, why don't you just talk about what it is that we're talking about as far as behaviors? Because again, when we talk about dating violence and domestic violence, most people go right to the physical stuff, right? It is right to the most visceral, terrible stuff that we can think of. But the truth is, it does not almost ever start there. So what we really need to think about is that this is a pattern of behavior. It is a pattern. It is typically not ever a one-time thing, and it's about power and control. Now, one of the things that people ask me all the time is, well, aren't people who are abusive, don't they just have like anger management problems and stuff? And the answer to that question is no. Whether they are an adult or they're teen, it is not about anger management, and it's not about mental health. Those are total myths. People who have diagnosable anger management issues are angry at everybody. Their anger doesn't discriminate. It's at the teacher, it's at Starbucks, it's on the street, is always right there ready to explode. But if we think about abusers, they're beautiful and gorgeous people to everyone else. So if I can be beautiful and gorgeous to everybody, I can choose whether or not I want to be beautiful and gorgeous to this person that I'm harming as well. So it is not an anger management issue. It is not a mental health issue. It is a choice of behavior, and it's about power and control, and we see it in a pattern over time. And we're going to look at the pattern in a second too. But where this starts is here. It starts in the verbal and the emotional piece. It is the name calling. It is put downs. It's mocking. It's embarrassing and humiliating somebody. It is playing mind games. It's threats. I want you to listen as parents for threats, because a lot of those threats aren't backed up with consequences. They're just sort of like empty and hollow sounding threats, but those are threats. Things like, oh, you better not do that. Just wait and see. I also want you to listen for threats of self-harm. We see this very often with young people. I will hurt myself if you or if you don't. That's really, really serious. When we hear that, we know that the person in that relationship is in really deep and that it's dangerous. That is not, it's not a joke. And when we hear that, that escalates the danger level in a relationship, that threat of self-harm. Isolation from family and friends. Again, this is one I want you to pay attention to. Now, this is kind of hard with teens because, you know, they're trying on different hats all the time. They're trying to be new people. They're reinventing themselves. They're trying to figure out who they even are, right? So they're popping in and out of clubs and sports and groups and friends, and they're doing all this kind of stuff. So sometimes this can be a little bit hard to see, but we want to pay attention to what patterns of behavior are changing. Did you tell me that you really loved lacrosse and then suddenly this semester you're like, nah, I hate lacrosse and I'm not going to do it ever again? What's behind that behavior change? Let's ask some more questions and lean in on that a little harder. So looking for that isolation, because when we lose our friends and when we lose our family, that's when there's more room to engage in yucky behavior that no one is looking at and no one sees. We also, economic abuse is all part of this too. Now, in adults, we think about like bank accounts and money and all that kind of stuff. And that can be true with young people. You know, they can be exchanging money and somebody can have money or whatever that looks like. But we also have to think about what resources kids have available to them as well. And sometimes those resources are their phone, their school books, their ride to school. It can be their part-time job. Am I showing up at your part-time job or calling you or texting you so much that you get fired from that job? That's what economic abuse looks like. What I also want you to think about in economic abuse is your kids' sleep, right? Their job is to be a student. If someone is keeping them from being a student and doing well as a student, that's economic abuse. If I am keeping you up all night long so that you can't study, so that you can't sleep, and you're tired and you can't function at school, that's what economic abuse looks like. If I'm telling you, please don't study, don't go to that study group, just talk to me for 10 more minutes, 30 more minutes, and you're not able to study and do the things that you should be doing, that's economic abuse. Students aren't able to do their job and be students. So we do have to think about that as a pattern of behavior too. Look at their grades. When did the grades start dipping? Was it when they started dating the person? Look for the patterns. Sexual abuse too, we want to think about things like unwanted comments about people's body, what you should wear, what you should not wear, how you should style your hair, sharing of intimate photos, coercing into sharing of things or sexual acts. In New York State, it is perfectly fine for people to take photos and videos as long as they consent to it and they're of a legal age. If anybody shares those photos outside of that consensual relationship, even if they were taken consensually, that sharing of the information is illegal in New York State. So that's important to know. Stalking is not the boogeyman in the bushes. It's not. It's the person who shows up for every soccer game and always shows up to walk into class and brings you a cup of coffee every single morning that is unwanted. And I don't want you to any of those things. It's showing up at your job. It's liking all of your Facebook posts. It is following every social media thing that you have. It's commenting on every social media thing that you have. Stalking is not just people in the bushes. Stalking almost always in this group, 85% of kids who are stalked by somebody they know. So it is also not a stranger. This is a current or former partner or somebody they have some kind of relationship with. And lastly, physical abuse. So physical abuse is typically one of the last things that happens in a dangerous relationship. So if you're concerned, if you're seeing signs of physical abuse, I need you to know this is the end of the cycle of abuse, not the beginning. We have to look for all this other stuff before typically this physical piece happens. So knowing that this is the behavior we're looking for in addition to anything physical that you might be concerned about. Technology fits in everywhere on this. So again, we want to pay attention to, how disruptive the electronics are. When our kids can't get off of their phones, it's not just us as parents losing our minds, like, can't you just take a break from that? It's asking a little bit of a different question is, are you able to take a break from that? If you didn't answer that message, are you concerned about that person's response? Are you concerned about what they might do? Are you concerned about consequences if you didn't answer that? If you didn't text right away? If you didn't share that location? Do you have concerns, fear, or dread about that? Those are great questions to ask rather than losing our minds about, like, can't you just put that thing down? We're just trying to eat a meal, right? I feel that. Ask a couple more questions about why it's so important. And if you didn't do it, what else? Then what? Changing and obtaining passwords, another big thing. You do not ever have to share your passwords. And trust me when I tell you, we will tell your kids this in school. You don't ever have to share your passwords with anybody. That is your private information. And a lot of kids will go, well, if my partner had nothing to fear, then they wouldn't care if I had their passwords. Okay, well, if that person has nothing to fear, then they don't need your passwords either. We can keep those protected. We absolutely do not have to share those. So again, another great thing to talk to your young people about. This is your private information. You absolutely do not have to share that and should not. Looking what else is on my list here. Sharing of locations. So again, we talked about stalking briefly, but honestly, there's all kinds of crazy things out there. I just did a training with the FBI that scared me in the stalking zone, but you don't need any of the fancy stuff to stalk people because all you need is Snapchat locations. All you need is a Venmo account. Holy cow. You can find out anything about somebody just based on their Venmo account. So thinking about what your apps are connected to, where you can find your location, that's how people get connected to each other. So this is the pattern. So we talked about that pattern of abuse. This is what it's going to look like. There's going to be a period of calm. There's going to be real goodness in the relationship. And then the tension will build and then something will happen. And then the relationship will return right back to that period of calm. I want you to pay attention to those periods when they seem really, really good. And then you'll notice something. And then you'll see as a parent, probably the really, really good again. I want you to try to start thinking about what is in this other piece of the relationship that you've missed. Start asking some questions about why is it so good right now? Right? Tell me about how you're really, really happy and this is really, really great. But tell me about last week. Was it this great last week? And if it wasn't, tell me a little bit more about why it wasn't so great last week. Your young people are always going to focus on the good pieces because that's how our brain works in trauma. It recycles back to the good stuff, not to the bad stuff. There can be really long periods of goodness and happiness in a relationship. And remember, abusers are beautiful and gorgeous people, young or not young, and they work to be the main source of love and comfort in that person's life. So when we see these relationships that are dangerous, we often, as adults and actually as support people, want to disregard the periods that are good. We do have to validate those and say, I'm really glad that it's good and you're safe right now. Knowing that it's going to become unsafe again. Now, the cycle over time, sometimes that good period will go away if the relationship and the danger is escalating. Not always, but it can. Let's see, I have a couple questions. Oh, I have a question about, what do you mean about information on Venmo? Great question. If you have, depending on what you make public on Venmo, you can see like everybody. You can see all of your friends, their pay history. You can just search for people publicly on Venmo if you are public, and you can see where things are going. Venmo tracks a ton of information about people. Just go on your Venmo and start looking up people you know. I guarantee you will find out information that you didn't know and probably didn't need to know. I have another question in the chat too. I'm just reading it real quick. Age appropriate, how to have the conversation for younger folks, like middle school age. We're almost there. We're gonna get to that. Okay. Oop, all right, got an animation there. Okay, so how do we do this? How do we do this as parents? How do we talk to our young people? So first of all, we want to notice stuff, right? Which is hard. We're all busy. I'm a working parent. I have 3 children. I get you. This is really hard. But we want to look for things that are changing. Is there a lack of interest in activities? When did it change? Look for the pattern on when it started changing. And ask about when it changed. When did this start? You said you don't like lacrosse anymore. When did you feel like you started not liking lacrosse anymore? Start asking some of those questions and start looking for the pattern there. It could just be because I decided I hate lacrosse, and it could be we can see the parallel with some different relationships. Again, changing friend groups. Changing in appearance too. So again, young people, I know they're all over the spectrum on this because they're trying to figure out who they are, but asking some more questions about when they're changing their appearance. We want to look for changes in attitude, changes in behavior. Anytime that there's like extreme gender roles that you can see, like very, very masculine or very, very feminine, we want to lean into that and ask a few more questions about, tell me more about that. Tell me more where you got the idea for this. Tell me what it means to you. Tell me how you feel about it. Words that they're using. So my youngest kids are young, and they sometimes come home from school and they're using words that I'm like, now let's talk about that word. Where'd you hear that? It's always the bus, by the way, because the bus is the worst place in America. But and then it's, what does that word mean to you? Tell me more about what that word means and the context of it. It's easier for us to understand what our young people are thinking. Sudden changes in a relationship. Again, if they suddenly like drop a friend or break up really fast out of the blue, that's a red flag. Ask some questions, notice, start looking for a pattern. If a relationship seems really, really too good to be true, I want you to lean into that too, because it most likely is. Asking more questions about why it's so great. Tell me what is so great about it. Tell me what your concerns are, if you have any about it. Anytime young people are engaging in risky behavior, again, they're young people, that's what they do, but also thinking about that can be correlated with a dangerous relationship. If they seem to have like no control over their lives or no control over decisions, tell me about decision making. Who do you go out with? Where do you go out? Do you have a choice about any of those things in your friend group or in this dating relationship? Ask those questions. Do you have choices? When someone doesn't have choices, that's a giant red flag. Listen. I want you to listen hard and keep your own lips closed, which is really, really hard. Listen. Listen for things like, I'm allowed to, this person lets me. Listen for things like excuse making and apologies. This person's not usually like this, or it's my fault. I should have known better. Um, Things like that are big red flags for young people. Any kind of fear or uncertainty about someone's reaction is a big red flag too. Tell me why you feel so uncertain about that reaction. Tell me what makes you fearful. Tell me what makes you pause on this behavior, thinking that this is going to be a reaction, or what do you think the reaction will be? Those are great red flags to listen for. So how do we have the conversation? I need you to own it. Just own this. This is so hard to talk about with our young people and with our own kids. I need you to just own the moment. Call it what it is. Be like an old, annoying parent and just be like, hey, listen, this is awkward and I'm old and I don't even know how any of this works, but let's talk about it. I feel really uncomfortable. Let's get uncomfortable together. Just own it. Actually calling it what it is and being awkward about it makes it a little less awkward for your kids, actually. Trust me, I do this all the time. So own your awkward moment. Do it. Talk about it and be real. Use the real words, y'all. We got to use the real words for our body parts. Use the real words that you're talking about. Are you talking about violence? Are you talking about sex? What is it? Use the real words. That's how kids get comfortable with it and get comfortable identifying with it. Talk about boundaries. Talk about your expectations. The boundaries are really important because kids are trying to figure out where their boundaries are. Help them understand where their own boundaries are and how to set them. Do you like it when people hug you? No. Well, then you just tell people, no thanks, not a hugger. That's it. Help them set their boundaries and then help them reinforce their boundaries when they get into situations where Aunt Sue wants to come over and hug them. Actually, you know what? Lisa doesn't really like hugs. So I do, by the way, you can hug me anytime. But you can say, Aunt Sue, Lisa doesn't like hugs. We prefer that if we don't hug. That's it. Help them reinforce the boundaries. Role model. Ask and keep on asking. We make this mistake all the time. We'll say, how's that relationship going? How's that dating relationship going? And then we ask them, we're done. Your doctors do a really bad job at this. I'm trying to fix them. They will ask you about relationships like once a year. Well, once a year is not enough. Once in a relationship is not enough. I'm going to ask you every week. I'm going to ask you every day how that relationship is going. Because the reality is relationships can change, and they change really, really fast. And they can change from day to day or week to week. So we want to keep asking, make it part of your routine. When you tell your kids, hey, this is part of the routine, I'm always going to ask you this, then they're ready for it. They know you're thinking about it and they know that it's coming. So either they can lie to you, which is fine, they're going to lie to you, or they can be ready to tell you the information that they want to tell you. Use real life as your toolkit. So a lot of kids don't want to talk about their own relationships. A really good strategy, use the friends. Hey, what's going on in Chloe's relationship? Remember when you told me about like what was happening over there? How's it going? Right? Use that relationship. What do you think about that? How do you feel about that? Would you do anything differently? If you were in Chloe's shoes, what would you do? Use that relationship as your tool to teach kids about their own relationships if it's too hard and too awkward and they won't talk to you about their own relationships. Look at what you see on movies, on TV, and in social media, and use that. Ooh, that's a really bad, unhealthy relationship. Did you see that? Did you see that video that's circulating on Snapchat? That's a really bad, dangerous relationship. Tell me what you think about that. Or like, hey, that's a really great example of a healthy relationship. How do you feel about that? Point this stuff out whenever you can, because again, it's normalizing the behavior that is healthy, and it is pointing out the unhealthy behavior in the context of the unhealthy behavior. Kids need to start making those connections, because otherwise they believe that all the garbage that they see in the media, which is mostly unhealthy, is the right idea about what healthy relationships are about. We talked about a bunch of this stuff already. Take those relationships seriously. Ask about technology. Ask about sleep patterns. What is keeping you up at night? Is it the text messages, and who is texting you? I know I've asked a bunch of why questions today. but thinking about trying to avoid why questions, because most of the time a why question is very judgmental and it puts people on the defensive. It's hard to even think about a why question that doesn't automatically put people on the defensive. So try to come up with more open-ended. Tell me more about that. How do you feel about that? What does that mean to you? Instead of asking those why questions. Also, don't give your kids relationship advice. Don't do it. You know why? They don't care and they're not listening to you. You are older, you're out of touch, and you can't possibly understand, mom. You have no idea. Okay, they're not listening to you. So just cut it. Don't just stop doing it. You're spinning your own wheels. When we give people advice, it's because we're trying to help ourselves feel better and we're trying to fix this thing over here, and we're not going to do that. So instead of giving advice, listen and ask them what they should do. Well, what do you think about it? If that was your best friend, if that was Chloe, what would you tell Chloe to do? Have them tell you their own advice rather than you give their advice, because they're truly just not listening. And honestly, this goes for all people, not just young people, because your friends who you're giving the relationship advice to, they're not listening either, because nobody broke up because you told them to. That's not happening. So relationship advice, let's just stop. So I also wanted to tell you to tell your kids about what you're thinking and set your expectations with them. They do not know where you stand. As somebody who did behavior with young people for a really long time, in some of the biggest consequences that are out there for young people that are not legal, the kids who were most afraid of their parents were the kids who had no idea what their parents' expectations were. They were the kids whose parents said, if you do anything wrong, I will pull you out of college and you will never go back to that place again. Now, most parents are not going to do that, right? Because you just paid $35,000 for that year. If that's not the consequence, don't put it out there as the consequence, because your kids are going to that extreme every single time and they're really, really afraid of you. So making sure that you're setting clear expectations and that they're attainable consequences, if there are consequences, let them know where you stand on things. This is our expectation around alcohol. This is our expectation around sexual behavior. Be really clear. They do not know what you are thinking. And when you try to beat around the bush, they don't get it. Their brains aren't developed enough to understand your around the bush rationale. Be clear and be direct with your kids. I have a question. Do kids know the differences between media, news sources, TV shows, social media? There's nowhere to differentiate where the facts are. Absolutely, they do not. They absolutely don't. They do not know the difference between any of those things. It is all just reality all the time to them. Every once in a while, we get young people who are really good critical thinkers and they will dig deeper for information and facts and fact find, but that is not most children. The other thing that happens a lot of times on social media is that young people, well, all people, but young people specifically, they post all this really great information about their friendships and their dating relationships. And the reality is that they're not that great. We're putting up this idea of what we want people to believe about what's happening to us. And it's not the reality of what is happening. But we look at that and we think, oh, that's what's happening and that's perfect. So I need to attain that. And I need to show people that I am attaining that. So pay attention to what your kids are posting. Make sure you're following them. Make sure that when you see something that doesn't seem right or seems like really over the top great, that you talk about it, ask about it, get more details about what it is that they're posting as well. That's going to help you figure out what's going on in their relationships a little bit more, and if it really is too good to be true. But no, they have no idea the difference between any of those things. A really great, and I can send a bunch of follow-up information, but a really great dating violence website is called One Love. It's the One Love Foundation. They have some beautiful teaching resources and some great videos that are perfect for middle schoolers and high schoolers. They're geared towards those age groups. It's a phenomenal website that kind of shows all of that stuff, and they do a really great job of looking specifically at social media posts. Okay, so if you think that your child is in a dangerous relationship right now, I need you to not threaten them because that's you being abusive. I need you to not threaten them. I need you to not like yank them out of that relationship immediately and say, you have to break up with that person. I'm going to cut you off from that person. That's not a great idea. If you believe that they are in a dangerous relationship, instead of saying, why don't you just break up? What I want you to do is I want you to ask them, have you ever considered breaking up? Have you ever considered leaving this relationship? And I also will bust this out into friendships because friendships can be pretty dangerous too. Have you ever considered leaving this relationship? And if so, what is standing in your way? That's going to get you at the heart of what's happening in that relationship that is dangerous. So this, why don't you just get out of there, or you're breaking up with this person and forcing it, not a good strategy. Ask the question, understand what the relationship and the barriers are like. What I then need you to do is pause. I need you to take some breaths and then act. What I need you to think about is, when you take an action like you're never allowed to see this person again, or I'm taking you out of this environment, or whatever that looks like, that can often escalate a danger level for anybody in a dangerous relationship. It is not an awesome strategy. And I know that feels awful as a parent to have to think about what they're going to stick in it and they'll be in danger. Got you. But we do need to think about how much danger they might be in if we yank them or take some kind of extreme action. Talk with your kid about the situation. Talk with them about the danger level and trust them when they tell you how dangerous or not dangerous, in quotes, the relationship might be. Can you empower them to make some different decisions in the relationship, or can you empower them and give them choices about what you can do in the relationship or to exit the relationship safely? Talk with a professional, please. Call us at Willow. Call your school, call a counselor, support people in safety planning. Honestly, it's the bread and butter of what we do. We safety plan with people every day, all day long. It's helping them stay safe in the situations they're in and helping them stay safe if they choose to get out of the situations that they are in. You're going to need support for your student, for yourself, for your family. These are long-term things that happen, and the effects, as we already talked about, are long-lasting and long-term. Please don't skip the support and the counseling piece. The emotional baggage is the stuff that follows us long after our bodies heal. And here's your safety plan. It's a stop, drop, and roll, right? Our kids know if your clothes are on fire, you stop, drop, and roll. How do they know that? Because we drilled it into them for their whole lives, right? That's how we know it as adults. Here's what I want you to start drilling into your students now. This is their safety plan. Who is your trusted and actually that should say safe. Sorry, not trusted. Who is your safe person? Who do you go to? Who, adult, safe adult, when everything is bad, when everything is good? Who is your safe adult that you can talk to, you can trust, you can tell them anything without being fearful of them? Now, I also want to add in the caveat that this might not be you. I ask my kids this question all the time, obviously, because this is my job. And my kids will go, Mom, you know the answer to that. It's Nana. And I'm like, okay, well, who's your next? If Nana's not available or we can't get a hold of Nana, who's next on the list? Mom, you know, it's Uncle Dave. And I'm like, okay, well, you can also talk to me because I'm a safe and trusted adult, but it's okay if it's not you, as long as they have somebody who is safe and that they can talk to. That's what matters. And then if they're young too, you need to tell Nana and Uncle Dave that they're the safe person and to be ready for something if it ever happens. So you need to ask these questions all the time, just like your fire escape plan, just like your stop, drop, and roll. Who's your safe adult? Where is your safe place? Where do you go when you feel unsafe? Where can you go if you feel unsafe? Where is a place that makes you feel good and comfortable and happy? Where is your safe place? And what are the things that you do to cope when you're not feeling okay, when your emotions are deregulated? What is your coping strategy? This is your stop, drop, and roll. Who, where, and what? Ask it all the time. The more you ask it, the more it becomes routine in their head. So if something happens to them, they know their stop, drop, and roll. Okay, I'm talking really fast. We are done. Whew, we're done. Okay, that was so much information. I know we have a few minutes for questions. I know that there was a couple questions in the chat. What's the actual website for One Love? It's called I think the website is actually joinonelove.org. I want to make sure I answered the question about middle school.
Lisa, I guess maybe I can stop the recording now?
Sure, yeah.